The rain streaks against the office window as Sarah stares at a blinking cursor. Her heart racing, not from the caffeine in her third cup of coffee, but from a vague, suffocating sense of impending failure. She is 34 years old and professionally successful, yet in this moment, she feels like a trembling 80-year-old standing in a quiet hallway, listening for the specific tone of a front door opening. To the world, Sarah is the reliable one, the woman who anticipates every crisis and absorbs every team member's stress. But inside, she is a hollowed-out shell running on a battery that died years ago. The exhaustion she feels isn't just the result of a long work week. It is the cumulative weight of a role she was drafted into before she even knew how to tie her own shoelaces. As the camera pans across her cluttered desk to a framed, fading photo of her as a small child, we see a girl with eyes far too watchful for her age, a girl who learned to read the room before she could read a book. Sarah grew up in a house where the air was always heavy with unspoken tension, a home where her mother's silent depression or her father's unpredictable temper acted as the invisible weather everyone had to navigate. To survive, little Sarah became a master of emotional logistics, learning to dampen her own joy so it wouldn't grate on a grieving parent, or perfecting the art of being invisible when the storm clouds gathered. This is the birth of the high-functioning adult who eventually collapses under the weight of burnout, a process not of laziness, but of a soul that has been on high alert for 3 decades without a single day of leave. We often speak of inheritance in terms of DNA or property, but the most potent legacy we carry is the psychological architecture built in the shadows of our childhood homes. Sarah's current burnout is a delayed response to the emotional labor she performed as a child, a labor that was never compensated and never acknowledged by the people who relied on it. Imagine a tiny architect forced to build a cathedral in a hurricane. That is the internal life of the sensitive child who must stabilize their own environment just to feel a modicum of safety. As we watch Sarah walk through the cold, fluorescent-lit office late at night, we see her checking her emails one last time, her fingers trembling with a hyper-vigilance that served her well in a chaotic childhood but is now killing her. She is still trying to prevent a catastrophe that happened 20 years ago, still trying to be the perfect, quiet girl who keeps the peace, even though the people she was protecting are long gone or changed. The sensitive child within her is screaming for rest, but the exhausted adult has forgotten how to listen. Because for Sarah, listening to herself always felt like a dangerous betrayal of the people who needed her. This psychological inheritance acts like a silent script running in the background of our minds, a set of instructions that tells us our worth is entirely dependent on our utility to others and our ability to manage their pain. When we see Sarah finally reaching her car and slumping over the steering wheel, we aren't just looking at a tired employee. We are witnessing the structural collapse of a survival mechanism that has outlived its purpose. The hyper-vigilance that once kept her safe from an unpredictable parent has become the very cage that prevents her from experiencing true intimacy or professional satisfaction in her adult life. We must understand that modern burnout is rarely about the volume of work we do, but rather the emotional cost of the masks we wear while doing it, and for Sarah, the mask is fused to her skin. The tragedy of the sensitive child is that they were never allowed to be messy, loud, or needy, because their primary job was to be the emotional shock absorber for the adults in the room. As the city lights blur through the windshield like watercolor paint, we begin to dissect the invisible threads that tie our current exhaustion to those early moments of forced maturity. Every time Sarah says yes to a project she hates, she is actually saying, "Please love me," to a memory of a father who only smiled when she was achieving something or staying out of the way. Every time she loses sleep over a minor social slight, she is back in that quiet hallway, analyzing the micro-expressions of a mother whose mood could shift like the tide at any given second. Healing the sensitive child within requires us to first acknowledge that the armor we built to survive our youth is now the very thing that is suffocating our adult selves. It is a radical act of rebellion for an exhausted adult to look at their internalized expectations and realize that they are carrying a backpack full of stones that don't even belong to them. Sarah's journey toward reclamation begins in the quiet realization that she is no longer that helpless girl in the hallway, and the door she is watching no longer leads to a room of danger. We see her sitting in a dimly lit living room, the silence finally feeling like a sanctuary instead of a threat. As she begins the slow work of dismantling the walls she built so long ago, this process of unlearning is painful and slow, as it requires us to confront the grief of the childhood we never got to have, a childhood where we should have been the ones being cared for. The internalized voice of the critic, which Sarah always thought was her own, is revealed to be the echo of an overwhelmed parent whose own trauma was passed down like a heavy, suffocating heirloom. To heal, we must give that inner child permission to finally be selfish, to be loud, and to be absolutely exhausted without the fear of being abandoned or punished for their humanity. Sarah looks at her hands in the soft glow of a desk lamp and realizes they are the hands of a woman who has the power to set boundaries, to say no, and to walk away from the burning buildings she didn't start. The reclamation of the adult self is not a one-time event, but a daily practice of catching the old survival mechanisms in action and gently telling them that their service is no longer required. As the camera zooms in on her face, we see a flicker of something other than tiredness. We see the first sparks of autonomy, a fire that was nearly extinguished by the damp weight of duty. She begins to understand that her sensitivity is not a defect or a burden, but a profound gift that was simply weaponized against her by a world that didn't know how to hold its own weight. The exhausted modern adult is often just a sensitive child who has been running a marathon for decades without a single water break, and the only way to stop is to drop the baton. We watch Sarah delete the work apps from her phone, a small gesture that feels like a tectonic shift in the landscape of her identity. As she chooses her own peace over the approval of a ghost, the invisible threads of inheritance are strong, but they are not unbreakable, and every time we choose ourselves over our conditioning, we snip another cord that keeps us tethered to the past. Modern burnout is the body's way of staging a coup against a mind that has been a tyrant for too long, demanding that we return to the core of who we were before the world told us who to be. Sarah walks to her window and looks out at the dawn, the sky turning a soft, bruised purple, symbolizing the end of a long night and the beginning of a life lived on her own terms. The hyper-vigilance starts to fade, replaced by a grounded presence that doesn't need to scan the horizon for trouble because it trusts its own ability to handle whatever comes. We see a montage of Sarah doing things for the pure joy of them, without a goal, without a metric, and without the need to prove her worth to an invisible audience of judges. She is learning that she is allowed to exist simply because she is, not because she is useful, not because she is a peacekeeper, and certainly not because she is a martyr for others' convenience. The sensitive child within is finally being tucked into bed by the healthy adult, told that the watch is over, and that the house is finally, truly safe for the very first time. Healing is the process of moving from a life of reaction to a life of intention, where we no longer let the shadows of our ancestors dictate the brightness of our own future. Sarah's story is the story of millions of us who grew up too fast and are now realizing that we have a whole lifetime ahead of us to finally be young and free from the weight of the past. As we look back at that old photograph one last time, the girl in the picture doesn't look so haunted anymore. She looks like she is waiting for us to come and pick her up so we can go home. The path out of burnout is paved with the courage to disappoint others in order to save ourselves, a trade-off that the sensitive child was always too afraid to make, but the adult must. We are the ones we have been waiting for, the only ones capable of breaking the cycle of emotional labor and reclaiming the autonomy that was stolen by the necessity of survival. The modern world will always ask for more, but the healed adult knows that they are already enough, regardless of how much they produce or how well they manage the emotions of those around them. Sarah turns off the light and the screen goes dark, leaving us with the resonance of her journey and the realization that our own healing is just a single, brave choice away from beginning. The threads of the past are long and tangled, but they are made of nothing more than stories, and we are the authors who get to write the final chapter of our own liberation. We move through the rooms of our lives and realize that the monsters we were hiding from were just the unhealed parts of the people who were supposed to protect us, and we can forgive them without remaining their victims. The exhausted adult finds rest not in sleep, but in the cessation of the internal war between who they are and who they were forced to become to keep the peace in a broken home. The sensitive child is a reservoir of creativity and empathy when they are no longer being used as a shield, and our task is to transform that shield back into a heart that can beat for itself. Sarah wakes up the next morning, and for the first time in years, her first thought isn't a checklist of others' needs, but a simple question of what she wants for breakfast. The mundane becomes miraculous when it is no longer performative, and the air feels lighter when you aren't trying to breathe for two people at the same time. We see Sarah walking through a park, the wind moving through the trees, and she finally feels the connection to the world that her hyper-vigilance had always blocked out in its search for danger. The recovery from psychological inheritance is a homecoming to a place we've never been, a sanctuary built from the wreckage of our old defenses and the raw materials of our true desires. Every step she takes is a declaration of independence from the emotional debt she never owed, a debt that was paid in full by the tears of a child who deserved better than to be an adult's anchor. The exhaustion begins to lift, not because the world got easier, but because Sarah stopped carrying the world on her shoulders, like an atlas who forgot he could just put the globe down. We are invited to look at our own lives, at the ways we have been performing the same tired roles, and to ask ourselves what would happen if we simply stepped off the stage and walked into the sun. The script of our lives is ours to edit, and the most powerful word we can write into the margins of our inherited trauma is the word enough. Sarah finds a small rock by the lake and skips it across the water, watching the ripples spread out, much like the ripples of healing that will now flow through her own life and into the lives of those she touches. She is no longer a daughter of chaos or a servant of expectation. She is a woman who has found the key to the hallway and has finally walked out into the open air of her own existence. The sensitive child is safe, the exhausted adult is resting, and the future is a blank page that no longer needs to be filled with the frantic handwriting of a soul in survival mode. We close on a shot of the horizon, wide and endless, representing the limitless potential of a life that has been reclaimed from the clutches of a history that tried to define it before it even began. The threads are broken, the weight is gone, and the silence is no longer a threat, but a promise of a new beginning where we are the masters of our own emotional destiny. Our nervous systems are not broken. They are simply loyal soldiers still fighting a war that ended years ago, and it is time to tell them that the peace treaty has finally been signed. We must be the parents to ourselves that we never had, offering the unconditional grace and the fierce protection that allows the sensitive heart to bloom without the fear of being crushed. Sarah's eyes are clear as she looks into the camera. a silent acknowledgement that the journey was long, but the destination is a freedom that cannot be bought or sold by anyone else's opinion. The healing of the sensitive child is the ultimate act of self-love, a reclamation of the soul from the factory of utility, and a return to the garden of being where we were always meant to grow. As the music swells and then fades into a gentle, rhythmic pulse, we feel the heartbeat of a person who is finally, for the very first time, living a life that belongs entirely to them. The darkness of the past is not forgotten, but it is no longer the light by which we see the present, as we have found a new sun within ourselves that shines without the need for fuel from others. Every deep breath Sarah takes is a victory over the suffocating pressure of her inheritance, a small but revolutionary act of claiming the space she occupies in the universe without apology. We see her back in the office, but this time she is leaving at 5. Her desk is clean, and she doesn't look back at the window because she is too busy looking forward to her own evening. The transformation is subtle to the outside world, but to the woman who has spent her life in a cage, the simple act of walking away is the most profound miracle of all. We are not our trauma, we are not our roles, and we are certainly not the exhaustion that we have used to prove our worth to a world that will never be satisfied. The sensitive child within is not a weakness to be cured, but a compass to be followed, leading us back to the truth of our own needs and the beauty of our own unvarnished humanity. Sarah's story ends not with a grand explosion, but with a quiet, steady peace that radiates from her like warmth from a hearth that has finally been lit after a long, cold winter. The portal to a deeper mind is found when we stop looking for answers in the expectations of others and start listening to the quiet, persistent whisper of our own tired but resilient spirit. We have traveled through the shadows of the hallway and the storms of the office to find that the only person we ever needed to save was the one who has been waiting for us all along. The threads are gone, the weight is lifted, and the air is sweet with the scent of a life that is finally, beautifully, and authentically our own to live. The journey of the sensitive child is the journey of every human who has ever felt the sting of being too much and not enough all at once, and it ends in the realization that we are exactly what we need to be. As we fade to black, we carry the image of Sarah's smile, a genuine, unforced expression of a joy that doesn't need to be earned and doesn't need to be justified to anyone. The healing is complete, the adult is autonomous, and the child is at peace, leaving us with the profound truth that we are the masters of our own psychological inheritance. Thank you for joining us on this deep exploration of the soul, and if you found resonance in Sarah's journey toward healing the sensitive child within, please subscribe to my channel, Deep Mind Portal.